Hey, good morning. Okay, welcome everybody. Hey, Wayne. Good to see you this morning. Hey, welcome to C3. Once again, our COVID-19 live Facebook feed. Just want to say hi and thanks for joining us, Instagram and Facebook people. And here we are. Maybe I'd like to give just a little bit of an update. First of all, the title for this week. I'm doing the Sign of Jonah Part 3. I could even do a part 4, but I think this might be um, the end of this little mini series. We'll see how this morning goes. And I'll say more about that in a few minutes. If you are new to C3, check us out, c3westmichigan.org. You can check out our Facebook page, also C3 West Michigan. And you can see our live videos. You can see our musicians who join us each week. You can sign up for our newsletter. And I highly recommend. There's all kinds of really good stuff in the newsletter. Things that are going on in the community, ways you can be involved and participate and lend a hand in any upcoming announcements, all that kind of stuff. Future guests, we're starting to schedule some future teachers in the month of August and also into September. So check all that out on the web. Worth a visit. Quick update on meeting. We were talking about meeting the week after Labor Day in the flesh, but things are not pointing in that direction. The community center, which we rent in Grand Haven, as you know, only has a minimum of 10 people per room, trying to follow the governor's orders. And so we just have to be patient and keep our ear to the ground, and we want to be smart, we want to be safe, but we will be looking for an opportunity to meet together. In the meantime, join us every week here on the Facebook Live feed. And thank you for your support. Those of you who have been supporting this place, even right now during this strange time, I just want to thank you. It means a lot. It helps us pay our bills, helps us bring in musicians each week. It helps us look for guests, helps us pay our rent. So really, thank you. Any way you can help support us right now is greatly appreciated. So that's enough of an introduction this morning. Oh, I should mention one other thing, because I see Sandy Kate is saying she really misses everybody. I agree. So we're looking for an opportunity to do a kind of Sunday afternoon, outdoor, socially distanced, get together, optional of course. So look for information about that in the coming weeks in the newsletter or announcements that I might make. We're just starting to cook up some good ideas. So, all right, let's talk about the sign of Jonah. If this is the first time you're joining us, you'll have to go back in time to get part 1 and part 2, because I want to jump right into part 3. But let me give you the framework. I've been working on a book, so this is like a little preview of the kinds of things I've been working on during the COVID-19 stuff. And I'm using the story of Jonah as a kind of symbol. And it is a symbol. In fact, some disciples ask Jesus for a sign, and they say, Jesus, give us a sign. Like, do a magic trick for us, is what I kind of hear in that. He says, no sign will be given to you except the sign of Jonah. And that is a rich and archetypal and symbolic sign. And the story of Jonah is a story of transformation. It's a death and a resurrection story. It's heading off in a certain direction, being thrown overboard, sinking, being swallowed by a fish, and spit out onto a new shore for a new kind of vocation. That's the Jonah story. It's personal and transpersonal. It's meaning it's an image of how personal transformation happens. You have to die and be reborn, so to speak. And it's an image of larger cultural transformation, that the path involves a kind of descent and return. And you've heard me say many times, quoting Einstein, no problem can be solved by the same consciousness that created it. And nothing short of a kind of death and resurrection of consciousness will do. In other words, if no problem can be solved by the same consciousness that created it, how do you change your consciousness? And it's not as simple as, doing your morning meditation sit and thinking good thoughts. The ancient path is something like the unraveling of your own life, glimpses of some sort of deeper reality, and trying to live those out in the world. And that's the sign of Jonah. And I've been talking about the last few weeks the pattern as it emerges in the story. So I'll give it to you again briefly. A sense of calling, being pulled out, lured somewhere. That's what calling is. Followed by severance. So some sort of break, some sort of cutting, some sort of being thrown overboard in the Jonah story. Followed by descent, which is exactly what it sounds like. An unraveling, a sinking. My life is falling apart. An unraveling of a worldview, if you will. That's the descent. And then there's a kind of underworld time, and that's where we are in the story today. Underworld time, which I want to talk about, followed by what I'm calling vox, or vocation, but I like the Latin vox because vox means voice. A kind of renewed voice and a kind of mission, if you will. And I want to go ahead and suggest something here. Any kind of classic descent and return story is not just personal. It's not just personal transformation, meaning me in my personally enlightened state. It's for some sort of greater service, some sort of larger vision for the world, some sort of way of living one's life in service of, in sacrifice to the larger community, to the whole, to the greater good. And I might add at this point, why should we be talking about this stuff right now? Because the massive pressures that the global economic system is putting on us are structures which are often rooted in injustice, our healthcare systems, and the kind of global anxiety that we are living through is ratcheting up that kind of existential pressure that sometimes kicks us on the larger journey. In other words, it's saying what I hear in the crisis that we're in, saying it's whispering and sometimes screaming, change your life, change your life. Change. Die and be reborn is the message. So today, what do I want to talk about? I want to talk about the underworld. So imagine calling, severance, descent, and now we're talking about underworld. By the way, I should mention, I think I mentioned it in previous talks, but one of the things that we talk about at Animas Valley Institute, where I'm doing my wilderness guide training. I've been involved with Animas Valley. You can look them up online. I've been involved for a really long time. And this very same pattern we talk about when we take people out to wild places and practices and conversations, we're often talking about the same kind of descent and return. So I just want to mention that because I'm not the only one saying this. So let's talk about this underworld time. So what happens in the Jonah story is that a giant fish comes and swallows Jonah. It takes him down. Now, archetypally, this is the journey to the abyss, to the underworld, to the labyrinth the mysterious labyrinth of what we cannot yet see or know. If you want to put it in psychological terms, this is leaving the world of ego and persona. It's even going beneath the world of complexes and subpersonalities, and to a certain extent, beneath even the shadow, what we don't know about ourselves, into the larger, what Carl Jung calls contact with the self, with a capital S. The mysteries, the eternal, the part of ourselves that rests beneath our ego consciousness. This is the underworld. In the story of Persephone and Demeter, Persephone is snatched by Hades and taken to the underworld, to Hades. And it's a terrible story, and Demeter's grieving, and she causes the whole world to go into kind of famine. And finally, they make a deal. And Persephone can spend half of the year in the middle world, but in exchange, she has to spend half the world, or half of the year in the underworld. Again, this is a kind of archetypal clue. A person who has grown up and who has suffered and who has tasted the depths, they have a kind of split. They can live between worlds. The underworld they have contact with, and the middle world. They're needed. And one other thing about the Persephone story. So the reason why Persephone can't just go back up to regular life is that she's tasted the sacred pomegranate seeds while in the underworld. In other words, she's tasted the mysteries of the underworld, and she'll never be the same. So maybe I want to say something about the underworld that's kind of poetic. So calling, severance, descent, underworld, once you've tasted some of the pomegranate seeds, so to speak, you're not the same. You've tasted the larger mysteries of your own life. You've tasted the eternal, in a sense. You've tasted how precious life really is, that everything is impermanent, and there's a kind of beauty to that, and it gives you a kind of aim and direction. That's the purpose of the underworld. In the Jonah story, what happens is that he begins to write poems. And that's exactly how the story reads. He gets swallowed by a fish, and then Jonah breaks into a kind of poetic song. Because the underworld is the place where the muses live, where poetry is born, where meaning resides, some sort of deeper meaning than my egoic starting place. My ego and its concerns and its bank account and its name and its identity. It's the place where identity no longer matters in that respect, and you've sunk into the underworld. You begin to taste the pomegranate seeds from the Demeter and Persephone story. So maybe I just want to mention a few things. So here are patterns that tend to happen in underworld time. In the rock bottom time, so to speak, down here, beneath the everyday social roles, we could say, and names and identities. So one thing that happens is that one begins to awaken that my life is not my own. Maybe that's the way to say it. One begins to awaken that my life is not my own. That's what's happening in the Jonah story. It's something like, meaning isn't found just in my own personal wants, desires, and plans. It's the beginning of an awakening to some sort of larger vision for life. So that's number one. Number two, the other thing that begins to happen in the underworld time is dreams, visions, synchronicities, encounters, life-changing conversations, poetry, songs. This is the language of the underworld. They all of a sudden start to resonate. I mean, the number of times that people have said to me, man, I was never really into poetry, but whenever you use poetry, something about it I like. Well, that's not me being such sort of a great teacher or something. It's it's that underworld pull. It's the language of the soul, the language of the mysteries, and poetry, song, art um, is is a way of talking about the truth in, as the Buddhists say, like a finger pointing to the moon, to the larger mysteries. So dreams, visions, synchronicities, encounters, life-changing conversations. And here's what I mean by that. If you've been in an underworld time or currently are, sometimes you'll bump into someone. Someone will randomly give you a book. Um, you'll have a strange encounter while on a walk with no plan, that all of a sudden, probably in looking back, you realize changed the course of your life. This has happened to me a few times, where what I would call a random and chance encounter suddenly alters the course of my life. That's underworld time. And it doesn't compute in the way our society runs, in the way modern culture runs, which is all about willpower and plans. And I'm not against these things, by the way. Willpower, making a plan, setting your intention. Underworld time almost like disrupts that, and you find yourself encountering some synchronicity. Synchronicity, by the way, just means a meaningful coincidence. So if you've ever had a meaningful coincidence, that's the underworld. That's the underworld rising up. And it whispers something to you, you hardly know what you're talking about. You hardly know what your own life is about. It's so much more. Those are the whispers of kind of underworld time. And Jonah begins to sing a song, write a poem, if you will, while he's in the belly of the fish. And I might say something else too, because underworld time is dark time, but David White calls it sweet darkness, which I think is such a lovely combination of things. It's dark, but there's a kind of sweetness. Rather, as opposed to sometimes when you're a descent, you think, my life is over, it's ruined, everything is effed up, there is no bottom, my life is meaningless. This is what descent can sometimes feel like. Underworld feels like a kind of sweet darkness. It's dark, but it's not that dark. Or what's that line by Leonard Cohen? It's the cracks where the light gets in. Yeah, it's that kind of mixture. It's that kind of paradox. That's underworld. Now, the purpose of underworld time, if I can put it that way, is to have something like an encounter with your own soul. And I know we live in Western, scientific, enlightenment or post-enlightenment times, and we sometimes don't like the word soul because it sounds too religious. It sounds too made up in a way to our scientific minds. But what I mean by soul and soul encounter is real contact with the aim or bent of your life. Like who you are at your core, your way of being that has to be recovered and discovered. Like the Buddhists say, the face you had before you were born. What a line, the face you had before you. That's a soul encounter. And it's like, oh, okay. Beyond the traumas that I've experienced, beyond the disappointments, beyond even the gifts that people think I have. Nope, soul encounter says there's a deeper aim to my life, a direction, a purpose, what the Greeks called destiny. Perhaps this is Persephone in the underworld tasting the pomegranate seeds, knowing she'll never be the same. And her destiny is to live between worlds, something like that. You could say of Jesus, soul encounter is something like the temptation time in the wilderness, where he's being tempted by power and fame and bread, which seems to be a symbol for the work of his own hands. Like be the man is something like that, and so this intense time of temptation is also coupled with contact with the Spirit, um, or with a deeper sense of who Jesus is. And it's like in the wilderness temptation, it's after this experience that he has an aim for his life. What was he doing before that? Living at home with mom till the age of 30. I don't know if you've ever heard that Jewish joke. How do we know Jesus was Jewish? Because he lived at home till he was 30. You know, that kind of thing. Um, in any case, without soul encounter, and for Jesus, it may have been something like an image, like the Son of Man or the Son of Humanity is really that's Jesus' self-referential title, by the way, the Son of Humanity, the Son of Man. And there's a contact there in the wilderness time, and it changes the course of his life. And he begins to embody that sense of self, that deeper sense of self. That's the purpose of the Underworld Time. To have something like soul encounter, the meaning of my life beneath my roles, my names, my ego, my personas, my identities, my Enneagram number, my Myers-Briggs, whatever, you fill in the blank. Something beneath that. And I'm just speaking archetypally here. The stories seem to be saying, you'll not have contact or soul encounter without calling, severance, and descent. Well, I don't know why. I wish it was different. But there's something about breaking with the first half of your life, with your first roles, that's required for this contact in the underworld. Something like that. Let me just take a quick pause here and make sure people are still on. Facebook has been giving me a lot of trouble each week, and I see that it's doing it again. So when you get a chance, Facebook people, give me a comment. Let me know you're still there. Instagram seems to be fine. Hey, everybody. So what have I said so far? Underworld Time is a place where we, one, realize that my life is not my own. Underworld Time is a place where nighttime dreams, visions, synchronicities, encounters, life-changing conversations begins to have a role in my life. It's a place where I begin to have contact with a sense of soul, a deeper reality, you could say. That's underworld, soul encounter. And maybe the final thing I want to say here about Underworld Time, in terms of what is happening, what's happening is we are experiencing the death of our adolescent ego. Now, I'm not against adolescence here. In fact, it's a wonderful, amazing, fiery, awesome time in life that is best suited for people who are adolescents in terms of age. What happens in our culture, and here's a quote from Bill Plotkin, is now we live in a pathologically adolescent culture. We never grow up. And we resist the sign of Jonah at all costs because we don't want to die. We don't want our egos to unravel. We want to keep propping it up and finding other people and partners that will prop that up for us, or jobs or whatever. Or identity groups and Facebook groups. And I mean, it's like every tool available to prop up that adolescent ego is what social media is and what our culture is driven on. So what's happening in the underworld is we're experiencing the death of the adolescent ego. And by the way, you have to have one for it to die. You have to have grown up enough and had a sense of, this is who I am in the world, in order for that to be taken from you. And you begin to go even deeper. So that's what's happening, I think, in the Underworld Time. The old word for this is initiation, in case you're wondering. The old word for this is initiation, initiatory journeys, ordeals. And ancient cultures, both for men and women, dreamed up initiatory journeys, ordeals, because they knew their young people were going to have a hard time growing up. We've forgotten that. We've said growing up looks like the ability to vote, or to drive a car at 16. That's growing up. No, that's just dangerous. And I'm saying that because I have two teenagers. So the old word is initiation. So you're experiencing kind of initiation in the underworld. Now, what happens at this point is once you've sort of passed through a bit of the initiatory belly of the whale kind of time, 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of a fish, or 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth, or 40 days and 40 nights without food, or 40 years if you want to use the wilderness story. Same with Buddha. This is Buddha sitting under the tree, and he says, he touches the earth, one hand on the earth and one hand in a kind of openness, and he says, I'm not moving here until I experience enlightenment. Okay, that's ordeal. Now, once you've tasted a bit of that, then in the story, Jonah is spit out on a new shore. And I think this is worth saying. From an archetypal point of view, from a story point of view, you don't get to choose when you're done. It's almost as if mystery decides enough is enough, now get to work, and spits you out on a different shore. And what the symbol is saying here is that you're not taken back to your old world. You are on a brand new shore. You've entered a new country, a new territory that has to be explored. There is no going back. You can try, I suppose. You can hit the eject button. I don't want this. But the story is saying something like, no, you're on a new shore. You can't go back. And you can only embody what you've learned in the mysteries of the underworld by walking out in this new landscape. And that's what happens to Jonah. Jonah walks out and goes to the city of Nineveh and begins to do the very thing that he was resistant to at the beginning, which was he begins to be like a prophet and kind of warn people and threaten people and say, change your ways. And this is the beginning of what I'm calling Vox. So as we come up from the underworld, we begin to inhabit a sense of vocation, a renewed sense of voice in the world. And the only way to find out if it's real is to embody it, is to speak, is to find out, is to use your voice, is to inhabit the little secret mysteries of who you are out in the so-called real world. This is so. If you take Jesus, for example, he goes through his ordeal in terms of temptation. He has contact with God, or the mystery of his own soul, if you will. And then the only way for him to find out if this is real is he begins to teach and heal and make disciples and, in other words, embody something. And that's what's being asked of Jonah. And if you take that question sort of personally, what is mine to inhabit and embody? Sorry, my cat wants in. Come here. All right, little nature interruption. 1 second. Okay, I'm back. Okay, a few suggestions on Vox here. And for the sake of time, I'm going to leave off reading the very end of this story, the Jonah story, because it's profound. And I'm going to do one more week. That was my sort of intuition. So there'll be a Sign of Jonah part 4. And it will really have to do with the last paragraph, the only book of the Bible that ends with a question, which is fantastic. I see a few people are fans of my cat. So just a few thoughts on Jonah here. On Vox, on voice. So when I say voice here, I mean a way of being. A way of being in the world that is something like your true self, your most natural self, your most grounded self, if you want to use kind of contemporary spiritual language. And by embodying such a way, of being in the world. That's using your voice. And I want to make that distinction because sometimes when I use vox or vocation, people think I mean employment, and I don't mean employment. What is Jonah's job? We have no idea. Does he get paid for being a prophet? Does Jesus get paid for being a son of man, son of humanity? Does Buddha get paid for being the Buddha? No, that's not the point. Only in contemporary society that's so desperate for identity, we've linked the thing you do for a living to vocation in the deepest sense, to vox or voice. Now, sometimes they're in harmony, they're in conversation. Like someone who knows in their core they want to make the world a little more just and fair. And every morning when they wake up, if they can make the world a little more just, they know they're on the right path, might become a lawyer or might work for some social justice organization. And that's a conversation between employment and vocation, but don't confuse the two. In fact, one's truest vocation, it doesn't matter what you do for a living. You can be retired. You can not have a job. You can have a survival job to pay the bills in order to embody the thing that you're meant to embody. And that could be in the way you raise your family or your grandkids or how you plant your garden or the kind of community you want to see happen in the world. Anything will do. But I'm just trying to make a distinction between employment and vox on the deeper level, sense of voice or vocation. And the only way to find out more about your vox in the world is to use it. And that's a bit of trial and error, which is happening in the Jonah story. It's a bit of trial and error. It's a bit of one step forward, sometimes two steps back. It's not as simple as, hey, I went through this giant ordeal and boom, from now on, smooth sailing. It's not exactly, I think, the ask of vocation. It's difficult to live from a soul-centric point of view in a world that's gone mad for material possessions and for impermanent pleasures. It's hard. It's hard. And much of our society fights against it. So I think at this point, I want to pause and say that's good enough for an introduction to the sign of Jonah. Calling, severance, descent, underworld, and the beginning of using one's vox, voice, vocation, beginning to embody that. So part 4 will be what happened to Jonah and a little bit of personal and transpersonal change. So that's coming. I think that's all I have for you. Hang on to the C3 site for our musician. Right now, I'm drawing a blank. I can't remember who our musician is all of a sudden. I forgot to write it down. Whatever it is will be totally awesome. And again, thank you for joining us. Thank you for participating in this format, this Facebook format, or on Instagram. I hope in your own way you begin to take a look at your own life and ask questions like, have I been through this kind of initiatory journey? Or even a sense of where might I be in this initiatory journey? You have to hold that somewhat loosely because it's not, it's a fluid. You can be in more than one place at one time, I should probably say. But beginning to do that kind of searching spiritual inventory. And, Max and Ruth. David Dean just texted me. Max and Ruth is on for the music. Do not miss it. It's going to be tremendous. So I'm going to hand it over to them at this point. Thank you very, very much. Thanks for supporting C3. Don't forget to read the newsletter. Peace.